Last week, we learned how Wilson relates to the American Football Championship Super Bowl. And today we move to the international stage in Italy, where the 2026 Winter Olympic Games are currently in progress. Welcome to another episode of the Cuz Wilson Show. This is where we talk about people, places, and things named Wilson. I'm your Wilsonologist, Kenny Wilson, and since last week's episode was the Wilson Wednesday after the Super Bowl, and this Wilson Wednesday, the 2026 Winter Olympic Games are being held in Italy, and it's still going on even as I record this episode. Now, this is the first year where the Olympics location is shared between two cities with equal focus, and it is nicknamed the Milan Cortina 2026. Milan is where most of the indoor competitions are held. In the West, we pronounce it Milan, but in Italy, they say Milano. Cortina, on the other hand, is where most of the outdoor competitions are held, but curling is also held there because it is the curling capital of Italy. Now, think of Cortina as, Aspen, Colorado. It is very similar in geographic location near the ski resorts, population and size, and economic demographics. In today's people category, we split it into two because we follow the amazing Wilson sisters who compete on the mountains at Cortina and a Wilson who competes indoors in Milan. Our places category stays in Italy, but with a bit more historic slant and a very interesting love-hate relationship. In both Milan and Cortina, things are related to Wilson's everywhere. You just can't see it. The Wilson Sporting Goods logo isn't found, but companies owned by a Wilson are all over both venues of Milan and Cortina. And now let's get on with the show. Let's start out with our part one of the people category. Let me introduce you to the Wilson sisters who compete at Cortina in skiing and snowboarding. And guess what country they're from? Not Switzerland, not Canada, not the USA, not Germany or Italy. Nope, and they're not from Jamaica either. They're from Australia. Yep, Australia. Most of you probably didn't even know Australia had snow. They even have about 10 or so ski resorts, and they sent 53 competitors to this year's Winter Olympics. I handed over some research to Notebook LM's Larry and Mary to give us a little background.
So just imagine for a second, you're making your Olympic debut. It's a huge moment. Now, imagine doing it at the very same games as your sister, but in a totally different, even rival sport. Well, that's the incredible story of Charlotte and Abby Wilson, two sisters from Australia's snowy mountains who are taking on the world together, and it's got to be one of the most unique family stories you'll see at the games. And this quote from Charlotte, the older sister, it really gets right to the heart of their story, doesn't it? Competing at this level can be such a lonely, high-pressure world. But for them, they have this secret weapon, each other. Someone who, just gets it. So let's meet them. Charlotte and Abby Wilson from Jindabyne, Australia. They both grew up on skis, but their paths went in completely different directions. And now, in what is just an incredible twist of fate, they're both making their Olympic debut at the very same games, Milano Cortina 2026. Okay, so what I find so fascinating here is just how different their sports are. On one hand, you have Charlotte and mogul skiing. It's all about technical grace, judged precision, and explosive power. And then you have Abby in snowboard cross, which is just this chaotic, high-speed, free-for-all, where the only thing that matters is getting to the bottom first. So you've got one sport about perfection, and the other, it's just raw, brutal survival and speed. Totally different worlds. All right, let's kick things off with the older sister, Charlotte. And her story? Wow. She didn't just show up on the elite circuit, she basically blew the doors off. For most athletes, jumping from the junior leagues to the Senior World Cup is a really long, grueling process. There's a big learning curve. But for Charlotte, nope, not at all. She went from being a promising talent to a legitimate top-tier contender almost overnight. Okay, let's just pause for a second and really look at this timeline because it's wild. She makes her debut in November. Just 2 months later, by January, she's already in a super final with the best of the best. And then March hits, and get this, on back-to-back days, she's named Rookie of the Year and then wins her first ever World Cup gold. I mean, that is an absolutely meteoric rise. And I really want to stress, this Rookie of the Year award, it's not some little participation trophy. This is a huge deal. Think about it. It's voted on by all the international coaches. These are the top minds in the sport from every country, and they all pointed to her and said, "Yep, she's the one." That's some serious respect. But it's how she won that first gold medal that's the real kicker. It was this massive upset. She went up against and beat the reigning world #1, Jolene Koff, a woman literally known as the fastest mogul skier on the planet. And she did it on the exact same course where she'll be competing for Olympic gold. Talk about making a statement. So at the same time Charlotte is absolutely dominating the ski world, her younger sister Abby is over on the snowboard side, carving out her own incredible path to greatness. So the family story is pretty cool. Both girls were on skis basically since they could walk, right? From age 2. But then, on a family trip to Japan when Abby was just 8, their dad, who's a snowboarder, got them to try it. For Abby, that was it. Click. She never put skis on again. And yeah, that choice definitely paid off. In 2024, she made her own mark on the international scene, winning a bronze medal at the Winter Youth Olympics. And let's be clear, this wasn't just some good showing. This was a major international medal that proved she belonged on that world stage. And that success has really put her right at the front of this awesome new generation of Aussie winter athletes. She's actually one of 5 teenagers on the team from Milan and Cortina, bringing this incredible, fearless energy to the games. It's really exciting to see. So you've got 2 completely different sports, 2 phenomenal athletes. But the real magic here, the thing that makes this story so special, is how their separate journeys are totally powered by this unbreakable sisterly bond. Oh, I absolutely love this quote from Abby. You can just hear the pride in her voice, right? And that little bit of sibling awe. You know that feeling when you see someone you literally shared a bedroom with go on and do something completely extraordinary. It just blows me over the moon. So great. And this just shows you how much of a family journey this really is. I mean, can you imagine being their parents, Nick and Kelly? For years, they've been waking up in the middle of the night in Australia, trying to watch these grainy live streams from the other side of the world. For them, this is everything coming together. And of course, even here at the Olympics, at the absolute pinnacle of their sports, they're still just sisters. There's this hilarious little tidbit where Charlotte admits she keeps her big Rookie of the Year trophy under lock and key because she's terrified her notoriously clumsy little sister Abby is going to drop it. It's such a perfect, humanizing little detail, isn't it? And all of that, it brings us right here to this moment. All the years of training, those 2 very different paths, all that family support, it is all coming together right here in Italy. And this is really the heart of it. What makes this so, so special? So just think about the scene. You've got 2 sisters. They're both making their Olympic debut. They're competing in 2 totally different disciplines, and it's all happening at the exact same games. And this is the best part, for the first time ever, their parents, Nick and Kelly, get to be there in the stands watching them live. It's just incredible. So it all comes down to this one question, really. The Wilson story is just such a powerful reminder that even though everyone's path to the top is different, having that one person by your side who truly, deeply understands the journey, well, that can make all the difference. And now we get to watch what happens next.
I love that story because I also looked up to my sibling. My brother won a McDonald's hamburger eating contest by eating 26 hamburgers in 1 hour. I was so proud. But now, part 2 of the people category.
All right, let's talk about one of the most polarizing figures in professional hockey, maybe in all of sports, Tom Wilson. He's a walking, skating contradiction, a player who starts arguments in every arena he visits. And today, we're going to unpack exactly why.
And look, this quote right here, it just nails it. This is the Tom Wilson paradox in a nutshell. How can you be the guy everyone despises playing against, but also the guy every GM in the league secretly, or not so secretly, wishes was on their team?
Because really, depending on who you talk to, he's one of two things. To 31 other fan bases, he's a goon, a menace, a dirty player who crosses the line. But to his own team, he's clutch, he's elite, he's absolutely irreplaceable. There is just no middle ground here.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How can the league's most feared player also be one of its most valuable? The answer tells you a whole lot, not just about Tom Wilson, but about where the game of hockey itself is going. Okay, let's dive into this. To really get this, you gotta go back to the start. Wilson didn't just stumble into this reputation, he forged it in fire, pretty much from the second he stepped onto NHL ice.
Wilson is the textbook definition of a power forward. And even when he was just a kid, the scouts saw it coming. One scouting report called him, and you have to love this, a tank in a parking lot of sports cars. I mean, that just paints a perfect picture, right? Big, powerful, and you just can't miss him.
So when the Capitals drafted him in the first round, they knew exactly what they were getting. They weren't just drafting a hockey player, they were drafting muscle. They basically handed him one job: make life miserable for the other team and protect superstars like Alex Ovechkin by being the scariest guy on the ice.
And man, did he embrace that role. He played with this ferocious edge that was constantly blurring the line, and yeah, a lot of times just flat out crossing it. His rap sheet, it is long. We're talking multiple suspensions for dangerous hits that made him a permanent resident in the NHL's Department of Player Safety Office.
And just to put that into perspective, check out this stretch between 2017 and 2018. 4 separate suspensions in just over a full season's worth of games. That's wild. It was this period right here that pretty much cemented his reputation as the league's #1 villain.
But, and this is where the story gets really interesting, while the entire hockey world was busy labeling him a goon, focusing on the hits, something else was happening. Tom Wilson was quietly transforming his game.
Think about it. He's on the ice every single night with future Hall of Famers. He wasn't just watching them, he was learning from them. He started adding some serious skill to all that raw power, realizing, hey, I can be way more valuable to this team by putting the puck in the net, not just putting guys through the glass.
And you can literally see this shift in the numbers. Look at his penalty minutes. Yeah, still pretty high, but they started trending down from that peak. But at the same time, his goal scoring, it just took off, rocketing up to a career best. He wasn't just an enforcer anymore. He was a legitimate dual-threat weapon.
And if you need any more proof, look no further than the Capitals' Stanley Cup run in 2018. He was a beast. He put up 15 points in 21 playoff games. He wasn't just some sideshow, he was a critical part of that championship team, proving that the guy everyone loved to hate could have his fingerprints all over hockey's ultimate prize. So once you see this evolution, you start to get a much more complete and honestly a pretty surprising picture of the guy behind that infamous reputation. You know, if you ever want to see what a team really thinks of a player, forget the interviews, just look at the contract. In 2023, the Capitals gave him a 7-year extension worth over $45 million. Let me tell you, that is not enforcer money. That's you are a pillar of this franchise money.
And his value goes way beyond the points or the hits. Inside that locker room, he's become a massive leader. He's widely seen as the heir apparent to Alex Ovechkin's captaincy, and he's been personally mentored by Ovi himself on what it takes to lead a team at the highest level.
Okay, so you've got this on-ice enforcer, right? Well, get ready for this, because off the ice, he's a completely different person. The aggression we see in the game is totally contradicted by his compassion away from the rink. This is a guy nominated for the King Clancy Trophy for his humanitarian work, a guy named Washingtonian of the Year. It is by far the biggest piece of the Tom Wilson puzzle. So what do you do with all this? You've got the brutal hits, the clutch goals, the quiet leadership, and the community work all rolled into one. What is his ultimate legacy going to be?
And this is what makes him so fascinating. You have to understand, in today's NHL of speed, skill, and analytics, a player like Tom Wilson just shouldn't work. On paper, he's a dinosaur. The old-school, one-dimensional tough guy is supposed to be extinct.
But see, that's the thing. He didn't go extinct. He evolved. He's living proof that raw physicality and intimidation still matter, that they can still win you games if, and this is the key, if you can pair it with legitimate top-line offensive skill. He's not just an enforcer. He's the next step in the evolution of the enforcer.
So that's what it all comes down to, really. Is Tom Wilson the last of a dying breed, a throwback to a tougher era of hockey, or Has he accidentally created a whole new blueprint for what it means to be a power forward in the modern NHL? A player who proves you can be feared, hated, and totally, completely indispensable all at the same time.
Well, I've followed Tom's amazing hockey play during this year because of his name, but now I really like him because he was taken up for Nathan McKinnon. Nathan is the superstar for the Colorado Avalanche here in Denver, and that's where I live. Well, that's it for our people category, but before we go to our places category, I'll give you the answer to last week's Cuz quiz. Last week, I asked two questions. What was the Vice President Henry Wilson's father's name? And I gave you a hint that his father was an alcoholic and had to take a cold bath. The answer is Henry's father was Winthrop Colbath. When Henry was old enough to leave home, he decided, I think I'll start a new life under a new name, and he found the name of a school teacher in Philadelphia who had a great reputation. The second question was about Henry Wilson's boss, President Ulysses S. Grant, and what was his middle name. The hint I gave you was, I'll give you a big hug if you know. Well, that hint was because the president's initials were actually H-U-G. Yep, his middle name doesn't even start with an S. His first name was actually Hiram. His middle name is Ulysses. Well, the S was actually a mistake because the registrar of West Point didn't know his middle name and forgot to ask. Well, he knew his mother's maiden name, which was Simpson, so he just put S down there. And Ulysses didn't really mind because on their lockers out in the hallway at the school, they put the initials of their name. And he didn't want H-U-G on his locker because he figured the other students would make fun of him, so he just left it. Well, he left it for several years, and it just stuck. Now, this week's Cuz quiz relates to last week's episode about Wilson's Sporting Goods, which made the football for every NFL game since 1941. The question is, what country was the founder Thomas E. Wilson born in and lived for the first 9 years of his life before moving to Chicago, where he started Wilson's Sporting Goods? And now it's time for the places category. Since the Winter Olympic Games are being held in Italy, I looked all over the maps on the internet for a place named Wilson, and I didn't find a single one. However, I did some research, and there used to be a lot of places named Wilson in Italy. And there's a real interesting reason why those names were changed, because of a love-hate relationship with President Woodrow Wilson. I gave that research to Notebook LM, and they're here to tell you all about it.
All right, let's dive into a pretty wild story. We're going to uncover how an American president went from being hailed as a literal saint on the streets of Italy to a national villain whose name was scrubbed from the map practically overnight. So, our whole story really kicks off with this one historical puzzle. You've got to ask yourself, why on earth would a major Italian city like Genoa name one of its streets Via Woodrow Wilson? And maybe even more interesting, why isn't it there anymore? And check this out. This is our first piece of hard evidence. It's a real postcard from 1919, and you can see it right there, clear as day. Genova Via Wilson. So we know for a fact the street was real, which just brings us back to the big question. What happened to it?
Okay, and this is where the plot really thickens. You look at a country like Czechia, and Wilson is still a huge deal. They've got train stations named after him. But then you look at Italy, and it's basically radio silence. Almost nothing. That contrast, that huge difference, tells you his legacy in Europe was all over the place. And that whatever happened in Italy, well, it was something dramatic.
So, to really get why he fell so hard, you first have to understand just how high he was flying. In early 1919, Italy was completely swept up in this thing people called Wilson mania. And I mean, it was an absolutely intense, almost fanatical wave of admiration for the American president.
And you know, this whole thing ignited incredibly fast.
I mean, think about it. The war ends in November 1918. Just 2 months later, in January, Wilson shows up in Italy and he gets this massive hero's welcome. And right away, towns all over the country start renaming their main streets and squares. You've got Piazza Wilson, Via Wilson, all to honor the man they genuinely saw as their savior.
And this wasn't just, simple political respect. Listen to the way people talked about him. He was seen as the prophet of a new era. That kind of language, it's not accidental. It tells you everything about the almost religious level of reverence the Italian people had for him at that moment.
So this is really the key to the whole thing, understanding why they felt this way. For the average Italian, Wilson wasn't just some peacemaker. No, he was the guy who was going to make sure they got what was coming to them. He was the guarantor. They were counting on his moral authority to make sure Italy got all the territory it had been promised for fighting in the war.
But here's the thing. All of that adoration, it was built on a massive misunderstanding. And that set the stage for a huge showdown at the Paris Peace Conference. This is where Wilson's big, grand ideals were about to slam right into Italy's cold, hard national ambitions.
All right, so on one side of this clash, you have the Treaty of London. This was a secret deal, classic old-school European diplomacy. It basically promised Italy a whole bunch of territory, including a big chunk of the coast called Dalmatia, if they just agreed to join the war on the Allied side.
But see, Wilson came to Paris with a completely different playbook. His whole philosophy was centered on this one big idea: self-determination. He believed that you shouldn't draw borders based on secret backroom deals. No, borders should be based on the people who actually live there, their common language, their culture, what they wanted.
And right here, you can see exactly why this was an impossible situation. On one hand, Italy is demanding Dalmatia and this really important port city, Fiume, because hey, it was promised to them in the Treaty of London. But on the other hand, Wilson's looking at the map and he sees that these areas are filled with Slavic people. So according to his big idea of self-determination, they should be part of a new country, Yugoslavia. There was just no way to square that circle. The two sides were worlds apart.
And man, this quote from Wilson, said right in the middle of these tense talks, it tells you everything you need to know about what he was thinking. The truth is that Italy went to the highest bidder. You can just feel the frustration in that line. He basically saw Italy as just trying to cash in, ignoring all his high-minded principles for a land grab.
So, the moment Wilson's stance on this became public back in Italy, well, the love affair was over. Just like that. The prophet of peace became a national traitor, practically overnight.
I mean, can you just imagine the shock? The one guy they believed was their champion, their god of peace, was now the single biggest thing standing in their way. This wasn't just some political disagreement you read about in the papers. For a lot of Italians, this felt deeply, deeply personal. It felt like a betrayal.
And all of that anger, all that feeling of betrayal, it all came together under one powerful and frankly dangerous slogan, Vittoria Mutilata, which means the mutilated victory. It was this belief that Italy had bled and won the war, but was now being cheated out of its prize at the peace table. And guess who they blamed? Wilson. He became the face of this betrayal, and this phrase became a huge rallying cry for Italian nationalists.
And the backlash was so fast and so public, anger just exploded across the country. Those very signs that had gone up just months before, people were literally tearing them down in the streets. Via Wilson was defiantly renamed Via Fiume. Talk about sending a message, right? It was a direct slap in the face to Wilson. And pretty soon, his name was almost totally erased from the Italian landscape.
And, Wilson himself knew exactly what was going on. And his reaction, it's kind of wry. Almost resigned. He heard that they renamed his street in Rome after Fiume, the very city at the center of their fight, and he basically said it was a practical joke on myself. It's such a perfect, ironic little moment that captures this whole crazy turn of events.
Okay, so after all of that drama, all that fire and fury, is there anything left of Wilson's legacy in Italy today? Well, the short answer is not really. It's almost all gone. But there are a couple of faint and kind of surprising echoes if you know where to look.
And get this for a surprising modern twist. Even though his name is gone from the streets, Italian artistry is still connected to him. As recently as 2018, a famous historic foundry in Florence was hired to restore the big Woodrow Wilson Memorial over in Geneva. So there's this quiet artistic connection that's still there, long after the political ties were completely destroyed.
And yeah, if you look really, really hard, you might find a stray commercial trace here or there. One of the only examples is this hotel in Rome, the Villa Wilson. But it's just a name on a building now, right? It's been totally stripped of all that huge political weight it once carried.
And that really brings us to the final takeaway here. This entire story, a president's rise from saint to scapegoat, it was all written and then erased right on the country's street signs. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What other forgotten histories, what other fallen heroes and crazy stories are hiding in plain sight on the street signs in your own city?
Well, I've never heard of that bit of history before, and it's so much fun to learn more and more about Wilsons around the world. Now, before we move on, I want to tell you about part of our homepage at cuzwilson.com. That's cuzwilson.com. When you go there, you scroll down to the bottom where you'll begin to see a lot of icons. I created a bunch of different categories where amazing Wilsons can be found, and some are so big I had to create subcategories, such as the sports category. And the icon for that category is the soccer ball. I separated many Wilson athletes into different categories. If one of those categories is a sport that you participate in, just click on it and you'll probably see a really cool story about a Wilson who excels in your favorite hobby. I've just started populating those different categories, and so it'll take me a while because there's so many amazing Wilsons that excel in almost every category. If you have a suggestion for a Wilson who you think should be on that list, let me know by clicking on the microphone and go ahead and leave me a voicemail and tell me the athlete's name and what sport they participate in. I'll even make a new category if one of those sports is not listed.
Do you want to hear an Uncle Willie joke?
Here is this week's Uncle Willie joke, straight from Italy. Why are mountains so funny? Because they are hill areas, or hilarious. Oh, that's bad. Let's move on to the things category. We know that Wilson Sporting Goods makes a lot of equipment for different sports. In fact, they make them for 13 different sports. Well, the guy who started the Wilson Sporting Goods division from the Maypacker plant is Thomas E. Wilson, and he died in 1958 at the age of 90. Wilson Sporting Goods has been sold many times since then. Even Pepsi owned them for about 15 years to diversify their portfolio, but they eventually sold Wilson to get back to their core business of food and drink. Well, the last company who bought Wilson is Amer Sports. That's AMER Sports. And Wilson from Canada was a major player in a group that bought Amer Sports after that happened. It's kind of come full circle. It's a Wilson again. The products from major brands that Amer Sports owns is all over the mountain. Now, since I'm battling laryngitis from last week, I'll give my voice a little rest and hand it over to Notebook LM to make sense out of all that information.
You know, when you think about top-tier sports gear, a few legendary names probably pop into your head, right? Brands that feel like they've been around forever, built on a real sense of authenticity and trust. But what if I told you that some of the most iconic, totally distinct brands out there are all connected by one single company that you've probably never even heard of? Come on, let's pull back the curtain and see who's really behind the gear we love.
Okay, first up you have Arc'teryx. If you're into climbing, skiing, or you just want the absolute best, most bomb-proof technical jacket that money can buy, you definitely know this logo. It was born in the Canadian mountains, and it's become the symbol of incredible design and quality that just refuses to compromise.
And then there's Salomon. Straight out of the French Alps, way back in 1947, this brand basically owns the world of trail running and mountain sports. I mean, their shoes and their ski gear are legendary among outdoor athletes for just performing, no matter how tough the trail gets.
And finally, you've got a true American classic, Wilson. Since 1914, this Chicago company has been woven into the fabric of American sports. We're talking the official football of the NFL, the official basketball for both the NBA and the WNBA, and I mean countless Grand Slam winning tennis rackets. Their stuff is right at the heart of the game. So think about it. You've got an elite mountaineering brand from Canada, a trail running powerhouse from France, and this pillar of American sports history. On the surface, they seem totally separate, right? Each one has its own vibe, its own story. So, what's the connection here?
Well, the answer is they're all part of the same massive global family. They're all owned and operated by one single, kind of hidden sporting empire that's been quietly collecting some of the world's absolute best brands.
And here it is, meet Sports. Originally from Finland, this is the powerhouse pulling the strings. We're talking about a company with a 75-year history and revenues topping $5 billion a year. This is one of the biggest players in the entire industry, and they manage the very brands we were just talking about, and a whole lot more.
Now, what's really wild is how Sports even became this giant in the first place. Trust me, its origins are a long, long way from the ski slopes and tennis courts we know today. Its history is just as surprising as its brand portfolio. Get this, believe it or not, Sports actually started out in 1950 as a Finnish tobacco company. Yep, tobacco. It wasn't until 1989 that it made this huge jump into sports when it bought the American icon Wilson. Over the years, it sold off its other businesses to focus completely on sports, even picking up Salomon from Adidas in 2005. But the really seismic shift, that happened in 2019 with a total game-changing buyout.
That 2019 acquisition completely changed the company's path. It brought in new owners with a really bold new vision for the future, one that was laser-focused on global expansion.
So who was behind this massive deal? Well, it was a group led by Anta Sports, which is China's biggest sportswear company. But hang on, look at that last name on the list. That might be the most interesting part of all. Animerit Investments. That's the private firm of Chip Wilson, the guy who founded Lululemon. He saw so much potential here that he personally invested to become a 20% owner, bringing his legendary brand-building genius into the mix.
And the price tag for this whole empire? A staggering 4.6 billion euros. I mean, to put that in perspective, this wasn't just a simple purchase. It was a massive bet that these iconic brands, with new management, could get even bigger on the world stage. So how does Sports actually manage this all-star lineup? Well, they've organized their brands into 3 very distinct powerhouse segments, each with its own identity and its own strategy.
First up is the technical apparel segment. And this thing is just driven by the unbelievable growth of Arc'teryx. This is the high-end, premium-priced heart of their clothing strategy.
And this slide right here, this shows their new strategy in action perfectly. Just look at the revenue breakdown. A massive 45% of Arc'teryx's sales now come from Greater China. Now that is not an accident. That is a core part of their growth plan, using their new owners' deep expertise in that market.
All right, segment number 2 is outdoor performance. You can think of this as the historic heart of the company's mountain sports DNA. This group is led by Salomon, but it also includes other top ski brands like Atomic and Armada.
Now what's interesting is that, in contrast to Arc'teryx, Salomon's stronghold is still its traditional home turf. You can see on the chart that Europe, the Middle East, and Africa make up over half of its business. That really shows its deep roots in the Alps and the European outdoor scene. And under the new leadership, they are making some absolutely huge moves. Salomon has been named a premium partner for the 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan and Cortina. We're talking about outfitting everyone from the staff to the people carrying the torch and the relay. This is a massive play for visibility, putting the brand right at the center of the biggest stage in winter sports. And finally, the third segment is ball and racket sports, and this is anchored by the incredible 100-year-plus legacy of Wilson. This is their tie to classic American sports, and it also includes other legendary names like the baseball bat makers Louisville Slugger and DeMarini. And yup, the data here proves it. As you can see, a whopping 68% of Wilson's revenue comes right from its home turf in the Americas. It just shows you its incredible heritage and market dominance in sports like football, basketball, and baseball.
So with this incredible portfolio of brands, what's the game plan now? Well, under the new ownership, Amerisports has a really clear, really focused strategy to take all of these brands to the next level.
It really boils down to a 3-step plan. First, keep pushing the brands as premium, top-of-the-line products. Second, sell more stuff directly to you, the consumer, through their own stores and websites. And third, this is the big one. use their expertise to supercharge growth in the enormous Greater China market, just like we saw them do with Arc'teryx.
Which really leaves us with a fascinating question, doesn't it? We buy into brands for their story, their heritage, their authenticity. But what does that word really mean when an iconic Canadian mountain brand, a French alpine legend, and an American sports classic are all part of the exact same global strategy owned by a Finnish-founded, Chinese-led consortium? It's something to think about the next time you reach for that piece of gear with a story you thought you knew.
Thank you, Larry and Mary, for cleaning up the thin air on that topic. The company I was telling you about that A. Wilson started in Canada is Chip Wilson's Lululemon, and they are the official outfitter for Team Canada for this year's women and men across the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And there's another way that Wilson is indirectly involved in this year's Winter Olympic Games.
And now it's time for Wilson's in the News.
For our Cuz Buzz section this week, here are a few articles of Wilson's that made the news. Dean Wilson dominated his first Supercross race in Birmingham, England. Nancy Wilson wants to make one last Heart album and do a victory lap in 2027 or 28. And I got a kick out of this next one. There's a town called Wilsonville in Oregon. They hired a new police chief, and his name is Jed Wilson. So Wilson is now the police chief of Wilsonville. I love it. Isn't that cool? Well, there are more Wilsons in the news in our free Cuz Buzz newsletter, so go sign up at our website at cuzwilson.com. And the next thing, if you haven't already, click follow and subscribe, and then share this show with every Wilson you know. See ya, cuz!